On October 28, 1962, the world woke up without knowing how close it had just come to nuclear war. For 13 days, the United States and the Soviet Union had been pushing each other closer and closer to the edge, and it all started with a few photographs. On October 14th, an American spy plane flew over Cuba. When the photos were developed, American intelligence saw something terrifying. The Soviet Union was building nuclear missile bases in Cuba, and Cuba was only 90 miles from Florida. These missiles could reach American cities in minutes. President John F. Kennedy was told about them 2 days later. Now he had a huge problem. He could bomb the bases, he could invade Cuba, or he could try to force the Soviets to remove the missiles without starting a war. Kennedy chose a different option. He surrounded Cuba with American warships. The goal was to stop more Soviet weapons from reaching the island. But there was a problem. Soviet ships were already heading toward Cuba. If they tried to break through the American ships, someone might open fire. And if American and Soviet forces started shooting, nobody knew what would happen next. On October 22nd, Kennedy went on television. He told the American people that Soviet nuclear missiles had been discovered in Cuba. Millions of people were suddenly terrified. Families started wondering if a nuclear war was actually coming. And then the Soviet ships reached the American line. The world waited. Would they keep going? Would America fire? Would the Soviets fight back? But then the ships stopped. Some turned around. There was no battle, no invasion, no nuclear strike, but the missiles already inside Cuba were still there. So the crisis continued. Kennedy and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev started exchanging messages. Both men wanted a way out, but neither wanted to be the one who backed down. Then came October 27th. Black Saturday, the most dangerous day of the entire crisis. An American U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba. The pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson, was killed. Some American commanders wanted immediate military action, but Kennedy held back. He knew that once the first attack started, he might not be able to stop what came next. And while all of this was happening above Cuba, something even more dangerous was happening underwater. Soviet submarines were hiding near the island. The Americans didn't know that some of them were carrying nuclear torpedoes. One of them was called B-59. The submarine was in terrible condition. It was extremely hot. Its batteries were running low. The crew was exhausted, and they had been underwater for a long time. Then American ships started forcing the submarine toward the surface. They dropped practice depth charges near the submarine. The Americans weren't trying to destroy it. They were trying to make it surface. But the people inside B-59 didn't know that. From inside the dark submarine, it looked like they were being attacked. And the commander was getting desperate. A nuclear torpedo was on board. And suddenly, the decision to use it was getting very real. One officer would soon have to make a choice. That officer was Vasily Arkhipov. Inside the submarine, the situation was getting worse. The crew was exhausted. The submarine was unbearably hot. The air was getting bad, and explosions were shaking the entire vessel. The commander, Valentin Savitsky, believed they could actually be under attack. The submarine was carrying a nuclear torpedo, and launching it was being seriously considered. But Arkhipov wasn't convinced they were under attack. He pushed for another option: surface the submarine, find out what was actually happening. The submarine finally came up. The nuclear torpedo was never launched, and the Americans didn't even know how close they had come. But the crisis was still not over. Kennedy and Khrushchev needed a deal. Khrushchev wanted America to promise that it would not invade Cuba, but he also wanted something else. America had nuclear missiles in Turkey, right near the Soviet Union. He wanted those missiles gone too. Publicly, America didn't want to make it look like it was trading missiles for missiles, but privately, a deal was taking shape. On October 27th, Robert Kennedy, the president's brother, secretly met with the Soviet ambassador. The basic deal was finally clear. The Soviets would remove their missiles from Cuba. America would promise not to invade Cuba. And privately, America agreed to eventually remove its missiles from Turkey. Now there was a way out, but the world still had to wait. Then came October 28th. Radio Moscow made the announcement. Khrushchev had agreed to remove the Soviet missiles from Cuba. The crisis was over. After 13 days, the world had avoided a nuclear war. But here's the terrifying part. For years, people imagined the Cuban Missile Crisis as a careful game between Kennedy and Khrushchev, two leaders making smart moves, two countries watching each other. But the reality was much messier. There were pilots, soldiers, sailors, submarine crews, commanders, and politicians. Many of them didn't know what the other side was doing. One wrong signal could have caused a disaster. One pilot could have made the wrong decision. One commander could have misunderstood an order. And nuclear weapons were sitting in the background. That's what makes the Cuban Missile Crisis so terrifying. Nobody had to actually want a nuclear war. They just needed to make one mistake. On October 28, 1962, the world was still standing, but most people had no idea how close they had come to something far worse. The Cuban Missile Crisis wasn't just a story about America and the Soviet Union. It was a warning. When nuclear weapons are involved, sometimes all it takes is one mistake.